Thanks, Annie, for the introductions. Hello, everyone. A very good evening to all of you. Hope you're enjoying the event as much as we enjoyed putting this event together for you. In this panel, we want to discuss competency-based leadership hiring. Those in leadership positions represent the company to multiple stakeholders, such as customers, shareholders, and many others. For the internal staff, they are an inspiration and directly impact the bottom line. Thus, their hiring is critical for the long-term success of a business. Recently, in a roundtable, I met a thought leader who used this term, future sharp leadership. Definitely, we need visionary leaders to handhold the organization in these disruptive times. The first point that I want to discuss in this panel is, what are the new age competencies that future sharp leaders must have? Let's start with you, Anil.
Hi, all of you. Thank you, Puja, for that question. And thank you for this opportunity to interact with all of you today. We're talking about new age competencies, Puja. Well, it's true that, the most of the workplaces have had transformations, some more and some less. And also that there has been a compelling demand for senior leaders to stay more human and less as reviewing managers in these times. And I would say that most of the leaders across all the organizations have handled this quite maturely across the globe. Well, they have been with their people in the tough times, been empathetic, and also been considerate. Well, at the same time, they have realized that they need to change the way they have been operating all along. And they have started doing that. Now, if you ask me, are there any new age competencies? I would say they are not new age ones, but those which probably have been a part of many organizational competency framework all throughout. Well, in some form or other, say, for example, change adaptability, resilient spirit, people centricity, and digital proficiency, have been a part of the list of competencies or as part of the competency elements in small or big form. Now, what has happened is the relative weightages that the organizations may like to give to these set of competencies today. Though perhaps going forward, the relative importance to be given to them will increase and there will be a conscious adaptation to this change.
Interesting, Anil. Thank you for sharing that point. I'll go to Amit and I'll just continue, where Anil left us, saying that relative importance of all competencies can go up and down between different organizations. So based on Barclays, BFSI, what do you say? Which kind of competencies are more important for leaders to have across domains?
Sure, Puja. Thank you very much for having me in this panel this evening, and very good evening to everyone around the table. So I think like Anil already shared, the workplace was already undergoing significant transformation, even prior to the start of the pandemic in the early part of last year. And I think what this global pandemic has really done is to add, several other dimensions to the breadth and depth of the transformational changes that are happening, right? In terms of its impact on business models, on looking at, complete reimagination of physical infrastructure, on the rapid adoption of digital technologies, and most importantly, completely reshaping the talent agenda and employee well-being, right? And we're still not done. I mean, if this were to sort of persist, if this were to prolong in terms of, future waves in India or other parts of the world, who knows? The uncertainties will continue to throw more complex challenges at us. Now, in terms of, I think, leadership competencies, it does throw up very interesting challenges and opportunities simultaneously, right? For leaders to be able to steer their businesses out of the crisis and emerge stronger from it. And in my view, I think there are a set of leadership traits and behaviors that can possibly differentiate the most successful leaders from the others. And what are some of these? I think these are probably universal, not necessarily confined to, I would say, financial services and others, but given that, to a lesser or larger extent, almost everybody has been universally impacted, right? But I think what I have seen in my experience and what I've sort of come across, first of all, most importantly, building resilience across the entire organization, right? Now, resilience in today's context has assumed a completely different meaning, from largely being prepared for short-term disruptions like floods in a city or torrential rains, or in the extreme scenario like a terrorist attack on a city, to now being prepared for what we call these gray rhino events, right, in which everything comes down for a very long period of time simultaneously. And predicting such gray rhino events, can be quite challenging. right? So how the challenge for leaders really is, how do you embed sort of resilience in your business processes, in physical or IT infrastructure, and of course your workforce plans. A good example of this is, I think, those businesses which were able to stand up virtual organizations last time around, in the early part of last year when the pandemic first hit us, have clearly demonstrated that they can sustain their cash flows and come out, much stronger through this turbulent phase. The second capability I would say is leading with a human face. See, in times of crisis, I think people look at leaders for clarity and hope, right? And it's incumbent on leaders to really demonstrate a much higher level of empathy, compassion, and authenticity. And this is an opportune time for leaders who are more successful, to sort of almost bring that human face of their organization to their workforce. The third and final, I think, a capability I would say is putting purpose over profits. This is the time for what I call responsible leadership, right? And not the time for sort of individual heroes at the top. And responsible leaders, for them, the definition of stakeholders is actually much broader than just shareholders. And it includes employees, environment, communities, and several others, where performance is not just limited to sort of financial performance in the short term, of course, which is important, but then their performance is looked at holistically when you look at how well an organization has delivered to its purpose. So now more than ever is a time for an enterprise to stay true to its longer term purpose and come out much stronger at the other side of the crisis. So I think there are very clearly a set of competencies that will differentiate the more successful leaders from the rest.
Very interesting, Amit, and I totally agree. Resilience, empathy, compassion, purpose, these are very important competencies for leaders to have. Rao, going to you, you coming from technology industry, which has also seen major disruptions. And in these last 2 years, a lot has changed with respect to how you interact with your customers, how you, look at business models and things like that. So in all this disruption, what kind of a role has leaders played, one? And because we're discussing recruitment today, I would also like to know from you, if you can share some example, if there has been any leadership hiring in the last 2 years, how did that, virtual hiring take place, and some inputs, some insights on that.
One thing that is somewhat clear in the pandemic is, at least I take the liberty of saying, recruitment is the worst function. Because all of a sudden you're caught in a situation where you have to work offline completely. And definitely, I think with the current scenario, post-pandemic rush of digitalization and the compounded growth that we are seeing in the industry, I think it's been crazy times. Coming back to leaders, I think the best part of talking late in a meeting like this is most of the good things have already been covered by some of our leaders, right? So I'll just add a couple of things, right? For me, I think it's tough to be a leader in the post-COVID world. Let's face that. And increasingly, leaders are becoming lonely at the top. I think whatever competency frameworks that we have seen, there is no such competency framework that is able to take care of that. Because recent studies have shown post-COVID, most of the leaders also are impacted, but they have nobody to share. Be it the CXOs, CHROs, or whoever's the recruitment leaders or the business leaders, they're all struggling. But I think we all look up to our leaders, but I don't know where the leaders have to look up to. I think we need frameworks, we need competency frameworks to take care of our leaders as the way we look at taking care of our leaders. And increasingly, human resource as a function is now talking about bringing the human face. I think Amit slightly to kind of touch that area. We're all looking at getting human back to HR. I think that's the big discussion point. And increasingly, if I've seen the CRO functions, I've seen the HR functions, really stood up to the task. I think they were the first guys who really took the heat. In fact, no amount of leadership training or no amount of competency framework would have really defined a playbook which would clearly call out saying what should be done during a pandemic. That is something that's clearly caught the attention of all the leaders. And Anil can really call out. Now I think he must be busy putting together a framework or some skills that what leaders should look at. And when we, just to your second point, what has changed, Puja, is clearly post-pandemic, I would clearly call it this rush for digitization started probably a couple of years back. But right now, what's happening is the growth we expected to happen in the next 3 to 5 years has come out all of a sudden. You're looking at for every 5 to 6 positions, sorry, every one position that I have to look at a full stack developer. It's the most used word. Sorry if I'm sounding a little technical. I'm as a recruiter, but every one position, or every 5 positions or 6 positions, there is only one suitable candidate available out in the market. This applies to the leaders also, right? We are only looking at a limited set of leaders who've actually seen the pre-COVID, post-COVID world and who are willing to kind of adapt. So one thing that is coming out clearly is in this tribes and squads world, DevOps world, we're looking at leaders who can adapt. I think some of our leaders touched it. But what is coming out clearly also is the fact that everybody wants a digital native leader, somebody who's coming. But when you look at digital natives versus digital migrants, most of us are digital migrants. We have not really grown completely in the internet world. So we want digital native leaders who are tech savvy, who understand technology. But again, what is clearly required also is the fact that while you understand all the nitty-gritties of the customer expectation, you also need to be empathetic. And there's no space for a leader who's not empathetic today. I think clearly that's the change that we are seeing, Puja. People are looking at leaders who are able to adapt. It's not about the skill set anymore. It's about the mindset. That's the future of leadership recruitment. I think prior to that, it was about the top line, bottom line, all that being probably the same. We are looking at leaders with a different set, a different mindset. That's what I probably would see at the moment.
So Saleel, going to you, how important is it that digital acumen is how important for leaders in your industry? And one is that. And secondly, what kind of competencies are more important for you in leadership in your organization?
Thanks, Puja, and hi everybody, especially to the viewers who have taken time to attend this session. It's a pleasure to be a part of this conference. And I was listening to all the other panel members talking, and while listening to them, I was also looking at Akhilesh and the halo behind him on the background screen. I said, is it probably the kind of leader that we want? I think that's just on a lighter note, but it sort of matches the discussion, his background. But coming to the FMCG industry that I represent, look, I mean, I think there have been a lot of changes that have happened across industry, and FMCG is no exception to that over the last 1.5 to 2 years time. But when it comes to the digital savviness, I would say that FMCG industry has been fairly aggressive in going digital over the last 4 or 5 years or so. If you look at my organization, we in fact have already launched a very successful campaign called Ambati on social media, and which helped us to come up with a new product. So you can imagine that for Mondelēz, having leaders who are digitally savvy has been extremely important, and it has of course increased over the last 1.5 years. But I think the key differentiator that I have seen, and I have been fortunate enough to explore, experiment, is to look at leaders who come from the gig economy, the gig space. 4 years back, when we used to attend these conferences, especially for TA, there used to be this discussion about AI, machine learning, gig workforce, etc., etc. Today, surprisingly, while AI ML is still relevant, we are talking about empathy, humane, perspective of leaders, which is great. As a recruiter, I find that it is great. I think a subset of that is the gig, workforce and the leaders coming from that. And in my organization, I'm happy to share that we have actually explored that element, and there are at least 3 to 4 roles that I have been involved in hiring from the gig space. These are senior leaders who chose to become gig workers, and who are of course available on certain specific platforms, and it has been an amazing transformation for us to see in the last 6 months, hiring some of these leaders who are digitally savvy, not digital natives, but digitally savvy, digitally natives, but who are very comfortable to be a gig worker and a leader for an organization like ours. I think that's one important shift that I see as far as the competencies are concerned. The second part, that I would see for my organization in terms of competency, is a part of our leadership framework is agility. We have a beautiful value, where we say agility over perfection, and we call it out loud. We say, okay, we want to prefer agility over perfection, and this is a value that we, defined even before pandemic hit us. And pandemic was a perfect platform to exhibit this value as a part of our leadership framework. And I think that's another important competency that we see in our leaders. How have they been able to bring the change and being agile to adapt to the changing environment. I think that's the second competency that I look at. And then the third competency that I would say any organization would look at, and more so now, is the growth mindset. Again, a part of our leadership framework. But I think as business leaders, we would always look at senior professionals who will bring in that growth mindset, that energy. And I think these are three competencies I would say which are crucial today for my organization and my industry also.
Very interesting, Saleel, and I'm very happy you brought forward that we can have leaders from the gig economy also. So generally when we think about gig workers, we generally think about the bottom line, or like on-demand economy, wherein you hire them in case of heavy sale periods and things like that. So I'm very surprised that even we are looking at hiring leaders from the gig economy. Akhilesh, I would like to ask you is if we have two kinds of skills. One is where you have qualification, education, and tenure. And the second type where you have behavioral and personality traits. So which is more important for leadership hiring? And secondly, do you see a skill gap based on where we've reached, in the business world in the last 2 years? Do you think the skill gap enlarging in this particular skill set in either of them? And which one more?
You reserve the interesting ones to the most controversial one. So, and that halo is for a reason, Saleel. So here's the thing, Puja. First of all, thank you for the invite. I'm very happy to engage in this conference and get to learn from all our esteemed panelists and also share some of our experiences. See, as an organization, we have adopted something a bit different around these experience brackets and things like that. We have actually abolished that whole notion of you need to have a certain experience to do a certain job. One of the things that we actually did was basically introduce launch something called as a leadership direct program. Now we are in the third batch of it, which was about bringing in millennial leaders. Now, they are not existent. Like what Saleel was saying, there's a different, or Rao was saying, there's a difference between digital migrant and digital native. So what we ended up doing is basically hiring people from MBA schools like IIMs or Kellogg or Wharton, and bringing them over and not putting them into, hey, here's the apprenticeship. You go and develop yourself. No, we actually gave them big P&L jobs, running accounts, running operations, running delivery to our clients. And we basically built out the framework around them to make them successful. They are different, they think differently, and it was a choice that we made to actually disrupt our own business, right? And change how we do leadership hiring, how we think about leaders of the future. And it is not about whoever is there is not great. They're all great. I come from a different era also, but it's about bringing the two together. It's about making a successful combination of the, let's say, digital migrant and the digital native leaders together and create an ecosystem that develops itself, that thrives itself. So when you ask me a question around, between education, experience, and all those things, and between behavior and personality and so on and so forth, we need both, okay? But even only education, experience, and knowledge does not guarantee success.
You still need to be a good person. You still need to be able to collaborate. You still need to be able to share knowledge. You still need to be able to work in a very dynamic ecosystem. Our world is changing. No one has the right answers. Okay, everyone is stumbling and failing and learning by it, and we all need that humility towards it, right? The other thing, what we have long pre-COVID, so we launched our culture framework, which we call a CI square, which stands for curiosity, courage, incisiveness, and integrity, about a few years ago. And we actually indexed our hiring profiles around CI square, people who actually meet those criteria. Now, you call it competencies, you call it cultural framework. It's basically about hiring people who demonstrate that, who will actually come, put their difference in our difference, okay, and make us even more different and make us unique. So that's what we are at. So I would say every company has its own way of leadership hiring, and there's no right or wrong answer. It has to fit that organization and that their culture. That's the most important thing.
You also asked us very specific things about the gaps that you might find in these areas, right? Like, and the reason that I want to add in is like, unlike Akhilesh or a few others here who might hire people from these schools, we typically have only lateral hires in my large sales pharma organizations. So I'll just address this, gap part a little shortly. So with reference to knowledge and qualification, right, you still end up getting more functional experts today, and relatively lesser guys, who have a very, very strong overall business orientation or an understanding of an organization-wide businesses. And this comes as a gap for us to develop the well-rounded leadership for the organization. That's for the knowledge and qualification part. With reference to the behavioral and the personality traits, well, you definitely find very good intent for developing others, but those intents getting translated to meaningful and structured actions seem missing at times. Well, today, the leaders are aware of the various responsibilities that they have towards a large mass of people whom they lead. However, you may call it the operational exigencies or the set of priorities that they get engulfed into. The commitment towards people development take a backseat. So even in an interview, while you're hiring, the examples of leaders creating more leaders in the system are very less heard of. So I thought I should say this.
Very interesting, Anil. Thank you for coming and sharing this point. Amit, I'd like to move to you, and I'm taking a cue from what Anil said. When you are hiring leaders from outside, would it be from the same industry, or have we reached a stage that we can have somebody from a very different industry, like a airline or a pharma, maybe not airline, but from a very, very different industry? How does it work? And second part of this question is that for leadership, CXOs and their direct reportees, do you hire externally, or you prefer internally as an HR strategy?
Yeah, see, I think it's a good question, and we spend a lot of time talking about competencies or traits or expectations that will make leaders more successful, right? In a context that is ever evolving, in a context that is highly unpredictable. And to me, I think before you really define the who, right? The who in terms of, who is it that you're going to hire eventually for a position that, you're mandated to, which I think is an easy part. I mean, and surely in the process of actually running a very structured search, you're going to land on at least a few individuals, if not the individual. So the who part gets resolved, as you get further into the process. But I think to me, fundamentally, the clarification or confirmation that is helping me to decide the who is the what, right? So for each role, at a leadership level, it is vitally important, in my view, to clarify what is it that we expect, the incumbent to be doing before you get down into deciding internal or external or outside or inside, etc. And these are very important questions which actually determine the right fit individual eventually to do so, right? And I would think the more you grapple, the more you roll in some of these dilemmas, the clearer your choices will be, and the likelihood of landing a more successful hire will, I think, be so much more, predictable. So I think what are some of these dilemmas in my view? First of all, do you look for someone within, or do you go out necessarily, right? And each of them has their pros and cons. I mean, given an opportunity, one would love to grow leaders from within, right? I mean, and it comes with its own share of advantages. You have robust successions, you have recognition for your top talents, you have clearly a benefit of retaining them. You have contextual knowledge and experience that you retain. But then they don't necessarily bring disruptive ideas. I think, like Akhil said very well, right? You add on your differences to the others, and in the process, you bring diversity to your leadership table, right? You don't necessarily do that by having more of the same, which is always a downside of growing people from within. So I think what works for the role, what works for the context is very, very important to determine at the start. The second, point, the second dilemma I would say is, do you hire from within the industry or do you go outside for it? And again, there's no right or wrong. There are risks and opportunities. There are pros and cons. If you look at somebody from within financial services, they would, fit in like yesterday into the role. They would be very comfortable in the culture. They would, pick up the ropes without a lot of startup time. They would sort of, run from get-go. But then what they will not necessarily do is bring fresh ideas, right? They won't necessarily bring dimensions that have worked in other industries. We spent a lot of time talking about digital adoption. Now, even in today's, if you look at, certain industries which are behind on digital adoption, and there are very, very clearly, there are industries that are further behind on digital adoption. Now, if you don't bring somebody who's been at the forefront of digital transformation in consumer-facing businesses like banks or telecoms or FMCGs, you will never be able to accelerate the pace of adoption in these, industries which are lagging behind to do it, because there isn't any resident knowledge, in the system to be able to sort of cover that gap. So sometimes being open to people outside of the industry is not a bad thing to do. There are many other dilemmas, right? Should you look at diversity? I mean, if you look at the Fortune 500 organizations in the US, there are less than 6% women CEOs. And it's a proven fact that having more diversity at the leadership tables will result in better performance financially, will result in an inclusive culture, customers, shareholders will appreciate it, and so on and so forth. So why is not being open to diversity an option at all? I mean, it needs to be evaluated more carefully. So lots of,
I agree. There are lots of permutation, combination, lots of contingencies. There cannot be any fixed strategy and formula.
The right answer.
Rao, I would come to you and ask you, taking cue from Saleel about hiring leaders from the gig economy. What you see that in your industry, in your organization, and what is your take on skill gap in leadership hiring?
That's a very good question. As we are talking about bringing in a lot of gig economy, leadership is one area people keep it like somebody, a leader coming with a hello, right? That's the space that we are all operating, right? Everybody wants predictability, a leader with credentials. Nobody would really just tried that to say that, hey, can we get somebody who can come in, fix this problem and move on, right? Today in our agile, I think we're talking about agility, we're talking about tribes and squads. That's exactly what's happening internally. But I think it's time we experiment to get leaders from outside who can come fix the problem and move on. And that is where we're seeing a lot of organizations accumulating leaders. And we've seen in the last few years, people being asked to move on, upskill. And that's where I think the gig economy will come into the picture. And it's wonderful to know that leaders are available in that space. And that's something I think we as an as an industry should aggressively try. Skill gap, again, right? I'll also kind of allude to what Akhilesh and Amit mentioned. While everybody wants digital native leaders and probably from the e-commerce or retail background, but there is a certain functional knowledge, I think, that is also required. We need to strike a fine balance. And that is exactly where I think post-pandemic, there is a frenzy of saying, hey, we need digital savvy leaders. We need people who spend probably, I think, unfortunately, there is certain age, numbers, and all that is being put. So I was talking to some of those hiring leadership executive search firms. But what is that we need to really keep in mind is that we also need some experience from the past, while also we bring in that fresh energy. And every organization, I think the needs are different. You can't cut, copy, paste competencies or a skill library from another organization, which is probably in its 20th year or 30th year. The same thing may not apply to an organization that is growing. So I think what is important is a one-size-fits-all is not going to work. Especially in leadership hiring, you need to know where you're heading. You need to know which part of the curve that you are. And based on that, you need leaders. And in fact, I think while we build internal capacity on leaders, leaders like Anil and others try to build leaders internally, I think there is a fine balance that's required at the end of the day. There is gap, but example today, there are new roles, Puja. If you look at it, companies are building community managers, community leaders. These roles were never heard in the past. You talk about cloud, you talk about Azure, you talk about Google Cloud, AWS. They're creating community managers who will interact with talent internally, interact with talent outside the organization. These roles never existed. But I think every organization in the space that they operate, they need to understand what fits for them. I think that is going to be the key. And if you really want to go with what an e-commerce company or a retail company does, that may not fit fit a manufacturing setup. Right? We need to really know what our customers need. What is our goal? Where is that you want to be in the next 5 years or 10 years? That should define your leadership goals also.
Agree to you completely, Rao. Saleel, I would go to you and ask you, these competency-based frameworks. I feel competency is a very heavy word also. I really liked, when Akhilesh talked about culture framework. Especially when we talk about leadership hiring, do you think competency-based frameworks and assessment, tools and all, don't you think these have become redundant and it doesn't make any sense? What's your take on that?
Yeah, well, that's a very pointed question that whether they have become redundant or doesn't make any sense. Look, I mean, I have a very strong view on assessment tools, and competency frameworks. I don't deny their value and their contributions. And my role, in fact, even before I joined corporate, I was in executive search firm as a principal consultant. So even there, we've always had these conversations. I think when it comes to leadership hiring, the role that assessment tools will play is relatively lower than what it will play in the middle management sector. Okay, and then again, as you go at the bottom of the pyramid, you will probably have assessment centers rather than assessment tools. You can still have assessment tools where you will have bulk hiring process going through. But coming to leadership hiring, let me first address assessment tools. I think they have a role, but that role is limited. It may not be the most critical role that one would play. You can take that support in your hiring decisions, but it is very, very important that when you're hiring a leader, you need to understand what are the key competencies that you're looking at, and what is the outcome that you're looking at. Okay, and once you have that clarity, and that brings to the second point of your question about competency framework. It's an overused term. There is no question about the importance of competency framework, but again, when you're looking at leadership hiring, there's a little part that it will play in making the decision of hiring someone. You're not going to really take a decision of hiring a senior leader who's N-1 or N-2, based on how you are assessing the individual on competency framework. That is one part of it, but it is really the physical interaction, the human interaction that's going to happen between two individuals, the hiring manager and the leader, the candidate, or the recruiter and the candidate. That data is going to be important for you when you're selecting a leader at a senior position. So I am a firm believer that you may call it conventional method, but it is only through multiple interactions that you are going to make a selection of a senior leader. You may have whatever results coming out through your assessment tools, whatever results coming out through your competency framework. It is going to be 3, 4, 5 deep interactions with multiple stakeholders involved in the decision making. That is going to be the most crucial part in making a choice as far as leadership hiring is concerned. And you talk to any consultant and executive search firms, they will precisely tell you that. They will bring in all these elements, but they will want you to ensure that there are multiple interactions. And mind you, even for the candidate who is a senior leader, it is extremely important to have these multiple conversations, because it's going to be a most important decision for him or her, probably after their marriage. So, that's how important that decision is. So I think that's what I would say, in response to your question.
Yeah. So, Saleel, when you talk about multiple interactions, before you finalize a leader, so as to say, now that we have so many digital tools and we have so much those recruitment software, can the process be expedited? I mean, the process of selecting a leader. Anybody can share their thoughts on this. How can digitalization help to increase the speed, or, do we see this happening anytime soon?
So I'll go first, since I was talking about it. I mean, absolutely. I mean, not so much of recruitment softwares. I mean, if you talk about ATS or other things, not so much of impact on leadership hiring, but the digital tools, especially you have all the connectivity tools. We are on this call or Teams or Zoom or whatever. They have made a lot of difference. First of all, we don't have a choice. We don't have an option to physically have an interview and a meeting. So it's completely out of equation. But secondly, the time that you're able to save because of this, this new reality, the new normal, has certainly helped in all kinds of hiring. I mean, not just leadership hiring, but all kinds of hiring, and more so leadership hiring, because getting time from senior leaders, the candidates, as well as the hiring manager and the stakeholders involved, would be a nightmare for a recruiter. You will have those leaders very open to give their slots. So it's not a question of people changing their slots or not giving their time. It's a question of matching the calendar, which was practically impossible for a physical meeting. That has eased out a lot, with the digital meetings that we have. And I mean, the good part is that in India, at least, and globally, probably it is something that was used even earlier. But in India, we were able to pivot around these digital meetings very, very quickly. I mean, a lot of companies who are not really using these tools, quickly had to adopt to this, and employees were comfortable to start using these tools. Of course, not to mention our standard practice of not using video many a time. It doesn't happen in the Western world so much, but for leadership hiring, I think this is a great advantage to save time on hiring the individual.
I'll share a slightly different thought, Puja, on this one actually. So while there's a plethora of tools and assessment techniques, etc., which are there for leadership hiring, and they're all used to achieve the hiring objectives. I personally feel that all of these should be used to make the right decision, and not necessarily to save time. Because leadership is hiring is one area where you actually want to take your time to get to the right decision, right? So because the investments that you're going to make in running an expansive search, right, and the consequences it will potentially have on a number of dimensions, right, internally, externally, the extended communities, and so on, can be quite significant. So you want to make sure that while you use the tools and the channels you have and put them to right use, they should only help you to make the right decision. And if that means that for the purpose of hiring the right individual, you take a while longer, I think that's time investment well made, possibly to do it, right? We need to be able to differentiate, I think, functional hiring or volume hiring or commodity hiring from leadership hiring. That is why this is such an exclusive space. I mean, where you have this is the privy of experts who really understand talent, who understand industries, and who understand how to make the process work on both sides. The risks and consequences need to be weighed, and without just making this a process that is solely focused on compressing timeframes.
The other there's one more angle to this. So like when we say for the organization, it can save on time, it can help take decisions. It's also important to understand from the candidate's point of view, right? Today, this kind of assessment tools, the digital technology, and the kind of processes have also been a very important part of the value proposition that the organization has to offer. So when you're hiring leaders, they come up with the mindset of the kind of organization that you are. And the first touch point is the assessment and the kind of recruitment process itself. The kind of frameworks that you have, the way that you put him through the entire process from start till end. Even reduction of time is important at a leadership level as well. So it's not only from the organization's perspective, but even for the candidate's viewpoint. If you look at bringing on some tools, having a kind of an artificial intelligence embedded, sharing the report, or taking him through a digitalized process of recruitment, really matters. And that's how probably many of the organizations have chosen to progress in that direction, to give a good value proposition right in the beginning.
Totally agree to you. Akhilesh, you wanted to make a point.
Yeah. So, I actually concur with a lot of things that Anil and Amit and Saleel have said, but I'll give it a slight bit of twist. We actually with the growth rates that we have, our leadership hiring is in multiple hundreds globally. So we have to still do with speed in shorter time, but with very high quality and very high candidate experience. Right. So we actually had to use a lot of digital tools, but more from a standpoint of augmenting machine intelligence with human judgment. So use things that can actually tell us a bit more about the person rather than make any decisions about the person. And go a lot proactive. So we actually had to flip our model from being, hey, when the position comes up or when we get a line of sight, we'll start working on things, to how do we actually talent map the market and see who are the 10, 20 people that we want to talk to, right? Why do we want to talk to them? Figure out what they are doing, figure out their footprint on social media and everything, and basically create that network diagram that actually says referenceability, that basically brings out the credibility, the thought leadership, and all of those things. And is just like leadership hiring used to be, a privy thing of the big, large headhunting firms. That never stopped a corporate to do it. Okay. So now corporates are doing it. And with the digital technologies, it is not a matter of who has the best black book. With 630 million people on LinkedIn, literally everyone is there. Okay? So it's about how do you approach them? It's about how do you actually talk to a senior leader and say, hey, I've been seeing your career trajectory, fantastic. How about talking about an opportunity? So it's about the finesse. It's about the art of actually knowing your customer even before you know before you have the first conversation, and then guiding them through the whole process, right? So it's a very interesting place. A lot of disruption is possible.
Leadership hiring, I think just Akhilesh mentioned, and I jumped at it thinking, hey, this is exactly what I was. Because see, leadership hiring is no more, I would say, an elite, focused numbers, small numbers. It's become a volume game, right? And that is where we're all talking about the skill gap, the leadership availability gap. Is increasingly now, all of us as organizations, we're trying to create that warm pool of talent. It's not reaching them when we need them, but I think creating that connect with them through our social media platform, through different channels, do some hackathons and other initiatives. Tools, I think we're all left with no choice but to get into digital tools. At a leadership space, I know we don't need AI, ML tools to evaluate, but at a junior level, there are tools that can really check if somebody is lip syncing, somebody is trying to flip through pages, somebody is getting prompted, that's fine. But when a CEO makes a statement saying, hey, I've cut down my travel time with these online meetings and I'm able to sign $1 million deals, leadership hiring is become much easier. Otherwise, it was set up in some nice fancy lounge and then probably in a coffee shop. But I think it's no more the trend right now. And definitely, it has become a volume game. So companies cannot kind of just wait for the requirements to hit their mailbox and then start working. I think the trend now is to create that pool of talent and start engaging with them much early. And that is where I think every company is getting into that forecasting mechanism to see what is that we need, when do we need the leaders, and how do we create that connect. I think that's going to be the key as we progress.
We'll quickly discuss, how we can make the top tier, more inclusive. Because that continues to be a problem here. Diversity in the top is still a matter in which we are struggling. So Anil, want to make a quick point on that?
Yes, see, we had been talking about the competencies all throughout, and now probably suddenly you're asking about inclusion-based, hiring, right? And how do we tackle it? So, see, mostly organizations, hire leaders to address the current challenges. Now, each organization has some lineage and by experience by which it decides that what works and what does not work in the context that they operate. So, like individual minds, even the organizations operate from past experiences. And hence, it would not be surprising to know that organizations have their own set of prejudices, biases, and practices that stay deep rooted in their beliefs. So competencies over a period of time build up as a set of beliefs for the organization, and hence anything that disrupts this belief will always have a conflict. See, inclusion is about challenging few of these beliefs. So however strong be the intent of the organizations, hiring leaders who match the inclusion criteria is a decision that very few organizations hence make. And these are actually the progressive set of organizations in my mind. So that being the case, would there be a conflict whether to go for a competency-based, hiring or inclusion-based hiring? The answer is yes, there would definitely exist a conflict. But to tackle it is again more interesting. Well, some of those things could be, in inclusion, what does it mean for our organizations can be well defined across from the management. How about, having the job descriptions also be having the inclusivity? Why not, make inclusion a part of the employer brand itself? But to do all this, it requires the openness to adopt inclusion and a mindset to carry on with it, which again, for many organizations is still far off.
Yeah, Saleel, you want to make a point?
Yeah, let me add a bit of a twist to this. I mean, I read this, in one of the articles of Conferry, and I really liked it. It says, what is the biggest roadblock for inclusiveness at leadership hiring? The biggest roadblock for inclusiveness is looking for cultural fitment. Just imagine, the fact that all organizations conventionally for many years and even today will always talk about, great candidate, has got some amazing track record, etc., but he's not a cultural fit. And it's a very gut feel thing, right? We will feel whether this person is a cultural fit for our organization or not. There is no, tool which is going to give us actual data. But that is actually the biggest roadblock today for inclusiveness at leadership hiring. Is it possible to say we will bring in people who may not be cultural fit, but who are agile, adaptable, so they will try and fit into the culture to a certain extent, but will also bring in a completely diverse approach and thought process? And would that make us a more inclusive organization? So, and as somebody who really is very much interested in leadership hiring, I think this is going to be very important aspect as we look at the future. Looking at cultural fit as a roadblock for inclusive hiring and pivoting that and moving beyond that. That's what
the challenge of culture fit is actually less about gender, in my view. So the moment you stereotype culture fit to mean gender, I think you've lost the game already, right? So there is nothing to say that a particular gender is more.
No, we are not talking about gender at all. I mean, there is no. I mean, I'm not even thinking about gender as I'm speaking. Because for me, diversity is way beyond that in any case, right? And when you talk about inclusiveness, gender is not even near in my mind. We still may be fixated with diversity and gender being married together. Inclusiveness is a far broader term, and I think you're right. I mean, it's not about gender at all. It is a cultural fit which is irrespective of gender. And that's the thought that I want to bring.
I totally agree. Inclusivity doesn't just mean having gender diversity, but also different other forms of diversity like socioeconomic groups, sexual preferences, and demographic differences. I'm conscious of the time, so we will have to close this very interesting panel. I know we all have lots to share, and we could have gone for a little longer. But it's time to close this panel, and I would thank all of you to have taken out time and be a part of this Talent 4.0 imperatives of new age talent acquisition. Thank you so much.